episode number 236 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. On today's episode, I'm going to talk about why your digestion is something that you need to pay attention to if you're trying to conceive or even trying to improve your fertility health or even trying to regulate your menstrual cycle. It is so pivotal. And the spleen and stomach in Chinese medicine, those are the organ pairs that are really pivotal and play a very important role when it comes to digestion. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. So if you've been on the fertility journey, I am sure you've been hearing people talk about gut health, why it's important. And if you're new to this, I will pretty much explain everything and why, from my perspective and my work with my clients and my patients, because I work online or in person, one of the biggest things that I always focus on is digestive health. In Chinese medicine, one of the questions that we ask is, what does your poop look like? It all starts from the poop. We have to look at the poop and obviously even how we're feeling after we're eating. Do you go into a food coma? Do you notice that you get bloated? And believe it or not, sometimes you might not even have any of those. You might have like a perfect size poop, perfect shape poop, firm, and not have any issues, go every day, but still are sensitive to certain things or have inflammation that you're not even aware of. So digestion is really important. And the reason why so many people have issues today is because a lot of what our food has, the processing and the ingredients that they have, for example, thickeners a lot of times cause inflammation in the gut. They can cause leaky gut syndrome. And I know all of these could be jargon for you, so I will try to cover really a more basic understanding of all of it. But basically, your gut health is how you are digesting your food, how your gut is responding to your food. Are you able to assimilate the nutrients and really extract from those nutrients? Do you have a ton of inflammation, which can cause you to not be able to take in the nutrients? And it can also cause what is called leaky gut. And for the reason is because it can cause the lining of your gut in your intestines to get thinner. And when that happens, basically toxins from the waste are able to escape into your bloodstream. And then by that happening, it causes systemic inflammation because your body is constantly fighting off like small infections. So it's kind of like low grade and it's constantly in the background and it's going to drain the body because the body's constantly trying to fight this inflammation. So it is really important to address digestion on many levels and to really understand why it is the way it is and why so many people have problems with digestion and what the things are that impact it. So common things that impact digestion really are processed foods, eating foods that are high in sugar that can cause lots of inflammation, eating fried foods, eating foods with trans fats, really all the processing and the really difficult ingredients to pronounce. Those things are things you want to stay away from. Typically, whole foods are much healthier. And from a Chinese medicine perspective, it's important that you're cooking your food and you're cooking your vegetables. You don't want to overcook, but you want to cook them enough where they still have, if they're green, the greens, they're not too mushy. They're cooked just right where they still retain their nutrients. They're easier for your stomach to digest. And you want to make sure you're chewing that food really well. And you're also having a full spectrum of different foods, variety, so that you're not having the same thing over and over again. So one of the things that can cause food sensitivities is even if you're eating whole foods, but you're having the same thing every single day, all the time, believe it or not, that can cause a food sensitivity to that particular thing. So say you're having broccoli. I'm just using this as an example. So if you're having broccoli every single day, you could actually develop a sensitivity to that food by having the same thing over and over and over again. So that's why it's important to eat variety in your food, eat the rainbow, as they say, and also make sure, because, our digestions could be picky and they can choose and pick from things that they're more sensitive to. And it could be something very random, like even lentils or something just that most people could be fine with, or even bone broth, which I'm always recommending. Some people could be really sensitive to bone broth. Very few. It is rare, but it can happen. So any food that you're having, I've talked about this in the previous podcast about being mindful. Mindfulness is really important. It's just becoming aware of how you feel when you eat certain foods. So those are things that you just kind of want to take as a practice into really anything that you're doing in life, is just becoming aware of how your body's reacting. So you definitely want to cut out things that you're sensitive to. And you also want to cut out ingredients that you can't pronounce. You want to eat more foods that are actually grown and harvested from the earth. And some of the things you might want to pay attention to are root vegetables, the benefit of root vegetables, and especially if you're not feeling grounded. In Ayurvedic medicine, we talk about the different doshas, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. And those are basically different body types with different elements. Vata tends to be a little more thin, and they tend to be a little more ether, of an element like of ether and air. And they tend to be a little bit more ungrounded, or they feel more anxious because their minds are racing because they're not rooted and they don't have as much grounding. So they can benefit from having some root vegetables where the vegetables are taking energy from the earth. The other thing that's great about earth is the spleen and the stomach, which are the paired organs that rule digestion. Their element is earth. Earth is really good for digestion as well. So it is always good to have good, healthy root vegetables. I prefer things like sweet potato over white potato, although white potato sometimes is fine, but it's just better to have certain foods that are more nutrient dense. So sweet potatoes are more nutrient dense. Same thing with beets. So those are root vegetables, and carrots. So you're getting like that root energy, you're getting earth energy with that food. And with the leafy greens, you're getting the sun's energy because it really stores and contains the sun's energy from photosynthesis. So lots of leafy greens, having just natural foods, and certain grains are fine. Although, some people say that grains can cause also some digestive issues, but I'm kind of going on a tangent here into the details of the foods. But ultimately, when we have issues with digestion, and a lot of them can stem from, like I said, processed foods, and also keep in mind antibiotics, what that does is it pretty much gets the good bacteria, the police, the ones that actually give off lactic acid. What that does is it creates an environment that supports the healthy microbiome. And you want the healthy microbiome because they will keep producing that which will create an acidic environment, or like a pH environment that is not hospitable to bad bacteria. And what happens is when we take antibiotics, it actually removes a lot of the good bacteria, and that lowers the lactic acid. It lowers the pH that helps the good bacteria to grow, or the pH that the bacteria likes. And what it does is it allows the bad bacteria to take over, the more harmful bacteria, I'll say. And what that does is that once that bacteria grows, it creates a pH that is not as hospitable to the good bacteria. or the ones that we want. So it throws off and it can cause something called gut dysbiosis. And then over time, that can create a chance for SIBO to happen, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And believe it or not, I've been reading a lot about this. That is actually a lot more common now than it ever used to be. And so what do people do? They take probiotics and they think, okay, like I'm just going to take a probiotic and it's fine. If you notice, many probiotics, they cannot survive outside of the fridge. You have to actually keep them refrigerated. Just think about what happens in your gut. You ingest these probiotics and it goes straight to a very acidic environment, which is your stomach acids. And then it goes through your warm body temperature. How much of a chance does it really have to survive all the way down into your gut? So that's this is something to kind of consider. And not only that, another thing to consider is the kind of food that the good gut bacteria, the good microbiome that's helpful for us, what they like to eat. And that's called a prebiotic. So you may have heard prebiotic, probiotic, and thought it was the same thing. It's not. The prebiotic is basically the food for the probiotic to survive and thrive. And so common myths around this is that, you just take probiotics and you're fine. And what it's going to do is it's going to recolonize and take over and start to form its colonies. And that's not true. The probiotic, number one, may not survive. And if it does, it doesn't stay forever. It just stays as long as you're taking it. So it doesn't actually recolonize. So there are a lot of things that we hear about and we don't realize. And the more I dug into this, I found it really fascinating. And a probiotic that I use is a spore-based probiotic that I highly recommend. And again, I always hesitate on giving certain brands and products just because I don't want to make it seem like I'm giving medical advice or telling you to take this, but just look into it and you can actually do your own research. But something called Mega Sporebiotic is a brand that I love and I suggest to many of my clients and patients. But Mega Sporebiotic is spore-based and it's something that they get from the soil. So spore-based biotics are different than probiotics. Number one, they're more stable. So that means that they will actually they'll basically go through your whole digestive tract and they won't start activating until they're in a hospitable environment. And what that does is it's not going to recolonize your gut, but what it's going to do is once they are there and they populate, they produce a lot of lactic acid and they start to create a pH balance that is hospitable for your good bacteria to grow. And when that happens, the bad bacteria also cannot survive because it's not a great environment for the bad bacteria. So you may actually, when you take this particular one, it takes a little time for it to work and you really have to go slow because it can create something called the die-off phase. And that is when, because of the lactic acid that comes on, it creates an environment that actually kills. They're kind of like the police for the bad bacteria, and they get rid of it because it cannot survive with what they're putting out. And when that happens, it's called a die-off. So like the bad bacteria are dying off, they're not able to survive. And with that, even though it's a good thing, it doesn't always feel so good because you might end up having a lot of diarrhea and it's a lot of bloating and not so great. It's not such a great feeling and not so great symptoms. So because of that, they recommend starting off very slow. You start off like the first week, every other day. And if that's even too much, you would do half a pill every other day. So it's really slow and then you kind of gradually increase and increase. I've seen incredible results with this particular supplement. And again, I'm not suggesting this is all educational. I'm not suggesting that you take it. You should always talk to your healthcare provider and also look and do your own research. But I personally have seen amazing results with it. And it is really, really amazing. It is something that does take a while, and I've learned that you don't want to take the prebiotic because they also have, the same company has a prebiotic. You don't want to take the prebiotic right away because that could feed the bad bacteria. So you start out with something so that you can change the environment first. And then once it gets more in check and it starts to produce the better bacteria, or it creates an environment that's more hospitable for the beneficial bacteria to grow, that's when you can start taking the prebiotic. And that's ultimately something that you can look into yourself just to make sure, and or talk to somebody if you're working with like an acupuncturist or a naturopath or a nutritionist, talk to them. And I'll tell you, I mean, that really makes a huge difference in so much because it can impact a lot of autoimmune conditions. There's definitely a connection with gut health and conditions such as PCOS and endometriosis or autoimmune conditions. And that's really important to keep in check, especially when it comes to your fertility health, because you have like certain conditions that can impact pregnancy, like stability. I mean, sometimes it can impact your ability to conceive or ability to sustain a pregnancy if you have autoimmune conditions. So all of those things are really important. And also getting rid of certain foods. I personally, I'm not a big fan of gluten. And I know people have many different opinions on that, but that's me. I'm not a big fan of gluten. I think that it is not as compatible with our digestive system. I've read a lot about it. It does tend to increase inflammation. I have people that have never been tested for celiac or even gluten sensitivity. They just get off of gluten and they feel better. And I see it so many times. And then also many times it's sprayed with pretty much the ingredient that is in Roundup, which is glyphosate. And a lot of wheat is sprayed with that. It's very hard to find wheat that is not, and that's organic and it's sprouted in a way that it's easier to digest. So it's just too much of a pain really to figure out or find something that actually helps. So it's just something that I really like to remove. And then of course, just see what else you feel sensitive to and just get rid of all of the ingredients you can't pronounce. Just go back to the basics and eat the healthy food, the proteins, the healthy proteins, grass-fed if you're going to eat it, or organic, and then also organic foods, avoiding pesticides, all those toxins. It's not great for the body. So just really clean, healthy eating and healthy fats. All of those things can really benefit the gut. But I wanted to make an episode about this because the gut is really, really, really important. And I have seen, and I've had Jesselyn on the episode a couple of episodes back. She had lots of autoimmune conditions, and she did really well with Megaspore, and her inflammatory markers really went down to the point where her rheumatoid arthritis went into remission. She eventually got pregnant twice with 2 healthy babies, not just pregnant, but full term. And it's important definitely to work on the gut. Sometimes it feels like the gut has nothing to do with fertility, but it has everything to do with fertility. So I'm kind of talking more in a functional perspective, but if you even think about Chinese medicine, the spleen and the stomach are the center. That is the direction. Every other organ pair has a direction, and the spleen and stomach are the center. And that is the center of your gut, your health. And the gut really is the center of all of your health. It can impact so many things. Hippocrates himself said that all disease begins in the gut. And the more I do the work that I do, the more I believe it. I really do. Another thing that impacts the gut is inflammatory emotions. That can really impact the gut. It can cause a lot of issues digesting because the gut also impacts the mind. And so it's kind of like the symbiotic thing, because the gut, if it's not as healthy, will impact your anxiety, and the anxiety can impact the gut. So it's kind of like, it's like pulling on the same string from different parts. They're both going to impact each other. So supporting both at the same time is really highly recommended. Also, having a mindfulness practice or having some kind of meditation or a de-stress practice. And it could be just walking outside, spending time outdoors. Also, being in the earth, grounding, lowers inflammation as well. And so that can help and support your gut. So there are many different things. I always say borrow from nature, and that also benefits you. But just really super important to pay attention to your gut. Really pay attention to how you feel. Pay attention to see if your poop is solid, not too soft, because that's not good. But it's also not good to not go every single day and hold it in, because what you're going to do is you're going to actually like hold on to the toxins. So having like a healthy digestion is really important. And if you ever do want to work with me, I do work online. I do gut testing as well. So it is something that I offer, and you can always find me on my website, michelleorovitz.com. Book a discovery call, see if it's a right fit, but it is something that I do offer. It's just really, really important, and it can make a difference. If it's, sometimes it could feel overwhelming trying to do it yourself, but it is doable. But again, if you need a little more help, I am here, I'm available. And thank you so much for tuning in. I really do hope that this inspired you to pay more attention to your gut. I would definitely look into Microbiome Labs, which is the Megaspore company. They have a lot of other things, but they are amazing. I mean, I have seen true transformation with them. It's just really important to make sure that you help your gut microbiome, because there are so many things in our normal life that disrupt it without us even realizing it. And I think it's an epidemic. And I think it's something that everybody should pay attention to and think about. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this was valuable information for you. And I am sending you baby dust if you are trying to conceive currently. And I hope you have a beautiful day. So that concludes today's episode. You can find all of the links mentioned on the episode notes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to share and leave a review. Reviews mean everything to podcasters, and I really enjoy hearing from my listeners. You can also find me on my website at www.thewholesomelotus.com or email me at info@thewholesomelotus.com. I love hearing from my listeners. If you're interested and want updates as well as a free ebook on my top 10 fertility boosting habits, you can visit my fertility page on www.thewholesomelotus.com. I thank you so much for listening in and hope that you have a beautiful day.